The problem Paul has is trying to get us to look forward to a capability that he cannot pass to you through words. So a lot of what we do is by inference. We solve problems through inference. And that is, I take the data and I apply a certain process. I can process the data, can rationalize the data, and I can solve the problem. And we tend to think that all problems can be solved by inference. Like if you had the right information and the right tools, you could do it. And this idea, what people don't really, everybody who sends their seminary students off to seminary, they're pastoral candidates or they're ministry-bound people, ministerial candidates. Everybody who sends them off to seminary is thinking this way without realizing, because they've never problematized the way they think. And what's one of the things we want to do is problematize the way that we think. How do we process data? So you send somebody off to seminary and you think that putting the right amount of knowledge and tools in their head automatically makes them able to replicate and propagate the idea set that you want to be conveyed. I want all these people to go out there and talk about Jesus the way that I want them to. I'm going to send them to this seminary. We can mass produce this capability there, like programming a computer. That's a Cartesian way of thinking, dualistic Cartesian mind. So all of church, they all beware of philosophy. And when they say that and they're promoting some kind of philosophy like Calvinism or provisionism, they are following Cartesian Descartes philosophy by doing this. By the having of systematic theology is Cartesian philosophy. And on the other hand, you have other people who are looking at philosophy, and there's, say, Kant, for example. They would say, well, it's not just being prepared to do proper inference. You need a qualitative transformation. You need to become something other than what you are in order to do this task. So if you wanted to win a basketball championship, for example, you cannot just learn the propositions. What's the court made of? What's the ball made of? How high does it bounce? You can have all the right answers to that. How high does the ball bounce if I push it with XYZ amount of pressure toward the floor? You could have all those answers. And the NBA players who are out there winning the championships, they might not even know the answers, but they can do it. There's a song that says, don't believe me, just watch. Okay. There's a doing component to knowing. And knowing the physics, for example, of a basketball and the rim and the goal and the people and how much they weigh and what hang time really is or isn't, that sort of stuff. Knowing all that stuff doesn't mean that you can do any of that stuff. And all of our Christianity today is really just about quantitatively knowing things and then propagating those things and following the rules. And then we act surprised when the real person inside comes out and shows themselves to not be such a rule follower after all, despite paying lip service to it. This past week, we did do a couple of videos on the Steve Lawson controversy. And the rule following, when you have neotenous, pathological, stage 3, game A versions of Christianity, do not be surprised when the rule following clay container, vessel, gets a lot of cracks in it, because what else would it do? It's the same, a 73-year-old who's an ideological, legalistic type of Christianity with lordship salvation and all that kind of stuff. It's just out of place. It's very neotenous. It's a carryover of characteristics from the youth well on into adulthood, way past the time when you should have those characteristics. So we follow Jesus as the way, not as a set of statements. And also we understand that the priority is love. 1 Corinthians 13. Let me get my pen out here so I can mark all over these slides again. The greatest of these is charity. A very clear statement about priority, that agape, love, charity, is prioritized above all these other things. Peter, above these things, have fervent charity among yourselves. Paul, above all these things, put on charity. Above all these things. So charity, love, agape, God is love, 1 John 4:8. So love is elevated above everything else you can possibly think of. Love is the fulfilling of the law. If you loved properly, you wouldn't need a law. Now the end of the commandment is this: charity, love, the desired end state of the commandment, the goal of me giving you all the commands that I'm giving you is what? Charity. That's what Paul's telling Timothy here, right at the beginning of 1 Timothy. And then Jesus even says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. Love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and prophets. What? Love. Love. Okay. Now, when I was an independent Baptist, I used to say that when you preach about love, you are being too ecumenical and too fuzzy thinking, because you're not, there's like a spectrum between love and truth, and you couldn't, if you overemphasize love, you would have to be de-emphasizing truth. And of course, at the time, I thought of truth as something that could be collected and held in a static repository. And now, as you grow, you understand that truth is the flow of reality. Truth is like a verb more than a noun. And we say that a lot. Like faith is more like a verb than a noun. God, it's helpful to understand God as more of a verb than a noun, depending on how you think. It's a meditative thing for you right there. Think of God as a verb. Like the reality is Godding right now, if you will. We have covered the background of Colossians. Our viewpoint in Colossians, whereas everything, especially if you're new joining us, the typical way we used to look at things is that, set your mind on things above is like when you die and go to heaven, or the millennial reign, something in the afterlife is how we Christians are typically programmed to think. What we are doing in this series, we're not saying that that's wrong. This isn't a dichotomy. It's not an either or, but we're zooming in on a fractal mindset. And we're going to take all of those things that we usually think of as pointing to heaven and the afterlife and that sort of thing, and we are thinking of them as pointing to the transformed self, the version of you that you could become if you were more like Christ than you are now. And you have to qualitatively transform into something else. Qualitatively, like the difference between a car and an airplane. When the airplane first came out, you could actually, when the Wright brothers first flew their airplane in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, December 1903, you could have outrun that plane with a horse. Okay. So at that time, it wasn't really a practical way to do things, but as it developed, it became extremely practical. Okay. So why would you take the time flying this little plane when you can do it much more efficiently with a horse? Okay. So it's a different kind of thing, the airplane is, and then its full potential probably still isn't realized, but the potential that we know of it today, you can go to the airport, hop on a plane, fly anywhere you want. Okay. That's the potential that it grew into, and you can't do that with a horse. So it's qualitatively a different kind of thing, right? And the transformation that we are supposed to undergo is to be qualitatively different, like a computer, going from a regular computer, like a laptop, or probably the phones or iPads or tablets or computers or TV screens that we're all watching this on right now. Those are standard conventional computers. Going from that to a quantum computer is a different kind of thing. It's not a quantity. It's not adding processors to the same kind of computing. Like this computer here has, like 192 gigs of unified memory. It's got a multi-core processor, but the multi-core processor and the single-core processor, it's just more of the same kind of thing. It's a quantitative enhancement, not a qualitative enhancement. Whereas quantum computing is a qualitative enhancement. It's the different kind of thing. Okay. And the systematic theology is not the right kind of thing to be doing. It's not what Christians should be doing. One day says, what's your view on eschatology? Is our growth aligned with any of the teaching of Christ's second coming? How does Israel's history and future impact our growth? Is this just second stage? It's interesting. I get a lot of questions, especially with the Steve Lawson stuff. What are your beliefs? What are your beliefs? I'm like, the asking of the question, what are your beliefs, shows me that you're left hemispheric and propositional. I'm not saying that about you one day, but here's something interesting. I'm not going to get into here. The same way we're taking this fractal mindset to the next stage of transformation, here's the hint that I want to leave you with, and I'm going to let you sort this out. all of the ego transcendence that has to take place during this, and all of the shadow work that has to take place to get from here to here, and all of the learning how to control your own mind that has to go from here to here, and the new you that has to be birthed from your feminine soul. Okay? All of that transformation, think fractally, is laid out in the book of Revelation. So the book of Revelation, we tend to think of it as some kind of eschatology of the grand scheme of things, of how everything will play out. And I'm not saying that it's not that. But what I am saying is that it is also a map of sorts, a description of sorts of the transformation from the stage you're in now to the stage you're going to be in next. Okay? And there are certain things that are kind of like your ego and resentment might be, the false prophet and the beast, things like that. And so that's all fractal. That's all in there. And I actually think for individuals, it might be helpful to learn to map out, learn how to map out your own growth and stuff before like take all this stuff smaller first before we start expanding out and trying to figure out how everything is going to go everywhere and all this whole big kind of stuff.